Using Camera Raw features. Camera Raw, you may have heard of it. It's a 16-bit format and it contains a lot of controllable data. So when we're talking about photography and images, we talk about Camera Raw as being the highest quality that's out there. The files are twice the size of a regular JPEG, and that's why a lot of people choose not to shoot their photography in Camera Raw because it just takes up so much space for storage. The cool thing about Camera Raw is that it does not discard any color information. So resolution contained with a Camera Raw file, around 65,000 data points in a 16-bit image. That's comparable to only 256 data points in an 8-bit image. So we're talking about a difference between 65,000 pieces of information versus 256. So that's quite a difference. Camera Raw file is very similar to a digital negative. It contains all of the information a camera has about a specific image. It's really similar to a TIFF format in that it does not discard any color information. With Camera Raw settings, they can be saved. We can save up to 100 settings and then apply to a specific camera or a specific lighting situation when you take your photography. So there's two different things we can talk about. Raw capture is how the photo is captured from the camera, and then raw processing, which is using the Adobe Camera Raw dialog box. And we get to that through Bridge. So we're going to focus on Adobe Bridge in this lesson rather than work in Photoshop. So when I'm in Adobe Bridge, this is a tool for organization, for seeing your files. It does have some metadata available depending on how the photo was taken. So in this case, I wanted just to share with you two different files. They're the same. One is a JPEG, one is a .dng, and we'll talk about DNG here in a moment. That's the file type that we're looking for in a Camera Raw. Also notice in Adobe Bridge, I have an icon here up in the top right corner. This little circular icon indicates that this has Camera Raw information. So when I'm in Adobe Bridge, if I do a Control O, we'll do with this file right here. If I do a Control or Command O for open, it opens that file in Photoshop just like this. Now if I minimize this, go back to Bridge, and on that same file I do a Control or Command R. What happens is I now am in Camera Raw. So you still see Adobe Bridge here up at the top, but I have this dialog box, kind of a new window that opens, and I am now editing in Camera Raw. I'm entering into Camera Raw processing with this Camera Raw dialog box. I'm going to click done on this for just a moment and show you one other way that you can open these. With my file selected, I can go under the file menu here in Bridge, and I can choose to open in Camera Raw. So now you can see my shortcut Command or Control R. So that's how we get these files into Camera Raw dialog box for editing. I don't have to start with a Camera Raw file. So some of you have the capability to shoot in the RAW format from your camera. Some of you don't. So I can open up typical JPEGs. I can open up TIFFs, either one of those, in Camera Raw. And so I'm going to go ahead and open both of these two JPEGs. Control click so that I can click multiple files. Shift click if they were in sequence. Control click if I want to hand pick the files I want to open. And I'm going to choose to open this in Camera Raw. So I can either click Control R or go under my file menu. Now one other thing that I can do as well, let me travel back to Photoshop here. This is Photoshop. So in Photoshop, if I have a photo that I've opened or an image that I've opened in Photoshop, I can go under the filter menu and I can click Camera Raw Filter. This also opens either JPEGs or TIFFs in Camera Raw. So a lot of different methods that you can use to get to the same point. So let's go back to my Camera Raw dialog box. So in the Camera Raw dialog box, I just want to give you a little tour of what you see. Now down at the bottom, let's start down here in the lower right corner. I have Open Image, I have Cancel, I have Done, and then over on the left, I have Save Image. So let's just talk about what these things do. So this applies the changes and opens the image in Photoshop. If I choose Open Image, let's get that tooltip up again. You can shift click to open it as a smart object in Photoshop. Cancel, of course, does as you think it would. It closes the dialog box without accepting any changes. And again, in all of these dialog boxes, if you option click or alt click the cancel button, it will reset. So any changes that you've done up here before clicking OK or accepting it or closing the box, you can reset everything if you want to sort of start over. Done applies the changes and closes the dialog box without opening anything. Now over here, Save Image. This one converts and then saves the image in Photoshop. Okay, so if I want to play with multiple images at the same time, I can open multiples, which I did this time. I control clicked and selected 2 images to open in Camera Raw, and they will appear over here in the film strip. So along the left side here, I have a film strip, so I can toggle back and forth, and you can see the information for each specific photo will update and change. So like I mentioned, we can work with a Camera Raw file format, we can work with a TIFF, and we can work with a JPEG. The toolbar is located up here in the center panel, and we have things up here like zoom, and we have the hand tool, which lets us move around navigation. Over here we have a histogram. So remember, the histogram is a chart, it's a graph of the number of pixels in a certain area, so it's counting the pixels of specific colors. And then here, each one of these little icons here is an image adjustment tab. And so when we call the image adjustment tabs, it's basically this entire area here, and when I click on one, it will change, and we'll talk about those in a moment. So when we're here in the Camera Raw settings, we can certainly change the settings for this specific image. What's cool about it is that in the RAW format, you end up with what's kind of called a sidecar file. You get an XMP file. The XMP file is the stored settings, and it's created when you open a Camera Raw file in the Camera Raw dialog box. It contains the metadata. So it accompanies the Camera Raw file, and it has all of this information. So that's what's unique with a Camera Raw, because I'm never destroying information, I'm just adding settings to be applied to the file. So back over here in the image editing or image adjustment area. So we find basic individual tabs, and if you let your cursor rest here, you'll see the first one starts with the Basic tab. So the Basic tab allows us to do specific things here. We have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, the clarity, the vibrance, the saturation, and up at the top we have overall temperature, and we have tint. And then we have the white balance here as shot, auto, or custom. And many of these have a pop-up menu as well. So here's my, I know it's running off, but you can see where I'm sort of selecting here, export settings to XMP. That's that sidecar file. So we can take these current settings and we can save them. We can load settings, and we can reset the Camera Raw defaults. So there's all kinds of really cool things that we can do here. Now in the next one, this is the tone curve. This finely tunes the tonality using a parametric curve and a point curve. So it kind of looks like a histogram with what we're more familiar with, the curves dialog box. The next one is detail. And this just sharpens the images or potentially reduces noise that would degrade the image quality. The next one is HSL/grayscale. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. And you can see that we have different tabs here. So these do get a bit more in depth, and this would be specifically for fine-tuning colors using specifically the hue, the saturation, or luminance adjustments. The next one is split toning. Split toning is where colors, sort of a monochrome images, or add special effects with color images. The next one is lens correction, and this compensates for any kind of chromatic aberration and vignetting that's caused by camera lenses. Sometimes we talk about, you know, a bird's fisheye or a barrel distortion. Some of that can be fixed right here. The FX always stands for effects. This simulates, you know, file grain if we want. We can do just different kinds of post-crop vignettes here as well. And here's the grain in the post-crop vignetting. The camera calibration, this corrects a color cast, potentially in the shadows, and it adjusts for the non-neutral colors to compensate for differences between your camera, the behavior of the camera, and the camera raw profile for your particular camera model. So you can adjust the camera raw settings to sort of recreate the colors in a photo more accurately. And there are some profiles up here. Camera profile. Now, if we are not using a camera raw file, which I am not at the moment, so I don't have that camera information stored, so all I see is embedded. If you did have a specific camera that you were using, there would be 6 profiles up there. And so here we can adjust, of course, the red, the green, and the blue. The adjustment settings here are stored within the camera raw database file or in that Sidecar XMP file that we mentioned. The presets here, this is where we can save or apply sets of image adjustment settings. I don't have any at the moment. And then snapshots, of course, records the image state at any point during the editing process, sort of like the history panel has snapshots in Photoshop. So let's go back and reset here for a moment. Now what we do is we use Bridge to copy and paste camera raw settings from one image to another. And what I'm talking about here, let's just go ahead and do done on these. Done. When you look at this file here, this is a DNG file. Remember I told you that the digital negative format is how we look at that camera raw, Adobe DNG. And it's really an archival format for the camera raw files that contain the raw image data created with the digital camera, as well as the metadata that was that defines what that data means. So it's designed to provide compatibility among the different types of camera raw file formats that are starting to become popular out there. Now when I'm in Bridge, I can select some files here and I can go under Edit and I can choose Develop Settings right here. In the Develop Settings, I can click either to copy the camera raw settings, or if I'm wanting to paste it, then I would choose to paste. So I copy it to the clipboard, so to speak, and then I can paste it onto other files. So I'm able to use Bridge here to copy and paste camera raw settings from one image to the other. So if I've done some massive color correcting and in my whole photo shoot I need to apply those to specific images, I certainly can do that. All right, let's go back into camera raw here. And remember, this is my DNG file. I'm going to do a Control R to open this back into color raw. So some of the tools that we see here in Camera Raw are repetitive of the Photoshop tools. For instance, up here we recognize the Zoom tool and the Hand tool. The next tool is a White Balance tool and a Color Sampler tool. We are familiar with the Color Sampler tool. We have a Color Targeted Adjustment tool. Okay. We also have a Crop tool. That one is familiar. We have a Straighten tool. We have a tool that will do that sort of item in Photoshop, so you may be familiar with that. We have a Spot Removal tool right here. We have a red eye removal tool, something familiar that you are maybe used in Photoshop. The spot removal tool, if I back up for a moment, this heals or clones the defective areas of an image before we bring it into Photoshop. So you can do some editing here in Camera Raw before you go into Photoshop. Of course, that red eye. Then we have an adjustment brush where we can play with exposure and brightness, contrast, saturation, clarity, sharpness, and overall color. We have a graduated filter, we have a radio filter, and then we have ability to open the preferences, and then we have, of course, the rotates. So some of those tools are familiar. I'll tell you, I've been in a professional setting with a photographer at General Mills and watched them as they shot their photos for their products in their test kitchen, and they had it all staged with their food stylists. And then we took the photos back into the design area, and the individuals took those photos directly from the camera and straight into the Camera Raw dialog box. And this is where they first did their editing before they entered into Photoshop. They did all of their color correctings here in Camera Raw before they went into Photoshop. So this is very much used in industry, very much used in the photography world. This is something that you need to be familiar with. If your camera doesn't have the capability to shoot Camera Raw, just know that it's here. Maybe take a regular old TIFF or JPEG and play with it a little bit to understand how powerful this tool is. So Camera Raw, something that you should be aware of, and do a little bit more research on it to learn more about.